Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. We continue with the seven signs. We last week finished with the first, which was the water into wine. I believe the miracle represents the sign of conversion, that just as Jesus changed water into wine, he also came to convert sinners into saints. And we noted the parallels there, that the change was instantaneous from the water to wine. That is part of the miracle. Jesus accelerated time. The treasure was in a clay pot. Paul speaks of that in 2 Corinthians 4:7, that God has taken the treasure of salvation and put it into a human vessel. That doesn't make sense. It was instantaneous. We have noted that. Jesus' control over the unseen world. Salvation, in one sense, is an unseen act occurring in the unseen aspect of the soul. And John is very specific. It was the beginning of miracles. And I think that is significant, folks, because until we experience the miracle of salvation, no other miracle really matters, at least eternally. And so that's where we start. Tonight I want to begin to look at the second sign, and my goal is to get through a majority of the narrative, and again to set it up. It is the healing of the nobleman's son. Now here are some things that have connected or occurred between the two miracles that I believe are significant and set the stage for the miracle tonight. Number one, we've had the cleansing of the temple. And folks, that is a big deal. For Jesus to go into that 40-acre parcel of land and to shut down the temple franchises single-handedly, wow. And that would have immediately put him on the radar of the Sadducees who run the temple franchises. It probably did not, they probably were up and running within, again, a short period of time. We have the conversation with Nicodemus, and that is significant. Nicodemus is probably the head Pharisee. You know, when Jesus says, you're the leader of the Jews, you're a ruler, the implication, the Greek participle, you're the man. And very, again, connected, if you will. But again, it ties into that conversion aspect of the salvation experience. At some point, that conversation led to the salvation of Nicodemus. We do not know if it was that night or not. It would appear that he was a secret agent Christian for a time. And we know that happens. But at the burial of Jesus, Nicodemus came out of the closet. And at a time when it would have been putting his own life and own reputation at risk to identify with Jesus because he was crucified for treason, Nicodemus stepped up. Good for him. Next, we have the story of the Bad Samaritan. How's that? Who became a good Samaritan? The woman at the well. And we see here the outreach of the gospel, Jesus' concern for the lost. Her salvation and testimony leads to a spiritual awakening with at least a region of Samaria. We have the last testimony of John the Baptist. And there's some things about John I don't understand. He was a shooting star, if you will. His ministry was very temporary. I believe it was well under a year. I lean more toward a 6-month ministry. I think John was dead. He was martyred well before his 31st birthday. And a lot of that, to me, folks, it just doesn't make sense. But he fulfilled his mission. And so there's been some dialogue. There has been some conversations after the cleansing of the temple. There was a lot of debate. And the pattern continues. Now that brings us then to the healing of what we refer to as the nobleman's son. And probably, folks, what we have looked at thus far has been what some scholars label the early Judean ministry. Probably no more than a 100-day period when Jesus' focal point was in the southern part of the country. We probably now are transitioning into the Galilean ministry, which is the longest segment of the public ministry. And this could have been one of the first events of the Galilean ministry, because we are back up into the northern part of the country. Personally, beloved, I would not be dogmatic. I believe that this nobleman is a Gentile. And it would fit within the theme of the universal aspect of John, because we've had Nicodemus come to him, and he's a Jew. We've had the Samaritan woman, that conversation, and she's a Samaritan. And if this man were a Gentile, which I believe he is, then all three major people groups have been presented the gospel. And it ties into John 3:16, for God so loved the world. And that's what John is trying to do. John is the universal gospel. Anyone from any background, anyone from no background can come, can read the gospel, and can find out who Jesus is. He is referred to as the nobleman in the English language, particularly in the King James. The literal Greek is the king's servant. Now, that at least at a minimum implies that he is a member of the Roman government. In that part of the country, Herod is the lead Roman politician. This man then is a member of Herod's court. He is one of Herod's advisor. Now, this is not Herod the Great. He has been dead for approximately 35 years, but it is his son, and apples don't fall far from trees. This is the Herod that the fifth trial of Jesus' court case will occur in Luke chapter 23. And he is not quite as antagonistic as his father was, but there certainly isn't any interest in truth, as we know from that. I think that one of the things we need to note, lest we get John into trouble or we get ourselves into trouble, this is referred to as the second miracle. And that is right, but it also, there's more than that. John says, yes, this was the second miracle. Do you know what we often overlook, beloved? That last phrase. When he was come out of Judea into Galilee. In other words, this is the second miracle that occurred in the northern part of the country. John does not say this is the second miracle chronologically. And a lot of people don't read that with comprehension, and they just say, oh, this is the second miracle in the northern part of the country. Other miracles occurred in the early Judean ministry, and that becomes, I believe, an important part of this account. And so, that next verse, please, Brian. John 2:23 is a key. Now, when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover, in the feast day, many believed in his name when they saw the miracles which he did. And so this would have been chronologically after the first miracle of the water into wine, but in that first Passover, many miracles. It is part of that multiple amount of signs and miracles that John speaks of in John chapter 20, verse 30. Nicodemus refers to it when he comes to him. The same came to Jesus by night and said unto him, Rabbi, we know that thou art a teacher come from God, for no man can do these miracles that thou doest except God be with him. And so Jesus has performed, and we don't know how many, but Jesus has performed at least enough miracles that he has gotten the attention of the highest ranking religious official in the country. And so there is internal consistency there. And I think that's important to note. Again, we don't want to get John in trouble, and we don't want to get in trouble. He is now up into the northern part of the country. And beloved, I think this is why the nobleman comes. Jesus is on the radar. You know, in American politics, and I don't know how long this has been around. I know it's been around my entire adult life, and it's an artificial landmark created by people. We think of a president in his first 100 days, and that's a big deal. And most presidents accomplish what they're going to accomplish in the first 100 days because that's kind of the honeymoon period. I want you to think of that in terms of the public ministry. Obviously, not that Jesus was a politician and wasn't concerned about that, but I would suggest to you that Jesus did so many miracles in that first 100 days that the leading religious official in the country, it got his attention, and now it has got the attention of a member of Herod's court. That is potentially, beloved, a lot of miracles. This king's servant has heard of Jesus, has heard the things that he has done, and he comes believing that he can deal with the problem that he has. Now, we do not know literally anything about this man other than his profession. He's a politician, and that's all we know. But we do know that this account begins with a crisis. His son is sick. Give me that next verse, please. And so Jesus again came into Cana of Galilee, where he made the water into wine. He's back in that small town. And there was a certain nobleman whose son was sick at Capernaum. Put that on hold. That is significant. And when he had heard that Jesus was come out of Judea, hence the early Judean ministry, this all fits, folks, geographically, chronologically, he went unto him and besought him that he would come down and heal his son. The Greek, beloved, there is child. It's a little boy. And we don't know how old. He is under 13, because in that culture, a 13-year-old boy just became a man. They did a very wise thing. They just skipped adolescence. That was just useless. And I have a very strong feeling about it today. You just need to skip adolescence. We're one of the few cultures in the world that has that, and you're just kind of stuck. You're not a child anymore. You're not an adult. You're a teenager, which gives you the whatever, the right to be stupid or whatever. And we just there's enough stupid in our culture. And so he's a little boy. We don't know what the disease is. Childhood disease, measles, mumps, yellow fever, malaria, who knows? We do know that it involves a fever and that the boy's at the point of death. And this man comes, besought is a key, Greek, begged. Continual present tense. He won't let this go. Let me ask you this question. Has this man ever begged before? It's unlikely, isn't it? Has he had people come to him and beg? Probably. The shoe was now on the other foot. Because of who he is, he probably has access to the best medical technology of his day and the money to pay for it. The passage indicates he loves his son. No doubt he has tried every horizontal resource available. Money has been no object, but to no avail. This man is desperate. And John, beloved, wants us to hear that in this man's voice. I don't know, beloved, if you've ever been desperate or not. You probably have. Particularly, the health of a loved one can really get our attention. Particularly, I have a child. I've never had to deal with it. Hope I never do. Dealing with Connie's cancer, my mother's cancer, has been enough for me. But I understand a percentage of this man's desperation. and he doesn't care anymore. The hurt is so great. The need is so great. He doesn't care what people see. He doesn't care what they hear. This is public. It's not like Dick and Demas who came at night. We are dealing with a desperate man, and he will not let go. You have got to come. But there's something that we should note here that is important. A crisis got this man's attention. And that is one of the purposes, beloved, of crises. God is not trying to be mean. But there are times in life, in order to get someone or a group of someone's or a nation's attention, that God has to put his finger on something that is really important. We need to understand that. And that's one of the things, beloved, that really concerns me about our country. There was a time when a crisis would get someone's attention, would get a country's attention. And I think we're becoming so spiritually callous, that is not even getting our attention anymore. I observe this with crises, and this is just personal observation. Fewer people are looking up, and they are not looking up for nearly as long as they used to. And that's scary. Because if blessing doesn't get our attention, and that's the purpose of blessing, we know that. Romans 2:4, don't you know that the goodness of God should lead to repentance? And then God will try a crisis, and if that doesn't get our attention, then it would appear to me that the next alternative is a worse crisis, because God loves us too much to let us get away with it. But thankfully for this man, and God, who knows what else God has done in this man's life to get his attention. Maybe this is the first one. But God put his finger on this man's little boy. But he looked up, and he comes to Jesus, believing that Jesus can heal. But he also has limited Jesus. Oh, next verse. Yep. Sir, come down here, lest my child die. Now, beloved, there's a twofold limitation here. Number one, you've got to be present. And that's part of the challenge. It's also part of the miracle. The second thing is, you've got to get there before he dies. Doesn't believe in resurrection, which is pretty extreme, but nevertheless. Neither did Mary and Martha, by the way, did they? What are they saying to Jesus? Lord, if you'd have been here, our brother wouldn't have died. Lord, you're 4 days too late. And, no doubt, we've got to be really careful, at least I do, about pointing fingers in any of these directions. But Lord, you've got to come with me, or my child is going to die. Now that is part of, again, beloved, the problem, and this is where, check out a map sometime, Capernaum is 20 miles away. That's a significant distance. And that 20 miles to us, even on a secondary main road, not a big deal. Now if you've cut your jugular, then if it's something extreme, you might not make it. But in most situations, 20 miles would not be, a big deal. The implication is that this man is on foot. That's the better part of a day's journey. Just about everyone could walk an easy 20 miles in the better part of a day within that culture. Something else that compounds it, we will see at the end when his servants meet him and tell him when the cure occurred. This is 7 o'clock at night. It's about an hour after sunset. You didn't travel at night, folks. It was hazardous. That's when thieves went to work. There are a lot of people out there that wanted to bonk you on the head and take your money. Maybe in an instance like this, you would have taken the risk, but most likely, in order for them to begin to travel, they would have had to have waited another 11 hours until 6 the next morning when the sun begins to come up. And all of these things are just adding to the drama, aren't they? But you've got to come. All right, I intentionally left out verse 48. Then Jesus said unto him, except ye see signs and wonders, you will not believe. That initially appears to be a heartless rejection, doesn't it? But we know our Lord, and we know He's not heartless. We know that He was compassionate, the ultimate compassion, the ultimate in love. I believe, beloved, we have to go as a twofold thing here, because the ye there just isn't you singular, as it is in our language, it's you plural. And so, interestingly enough, folks, if we backtrack back earlier in the chapter, give me that slide, please, Brian. Now, after 43 through 45 are significant. Now, after 2 days, he departed thence and went into Galilee, which is where we find him right now. For Jesus testified that a prophet hath no honor in his own country. Then when he was come into Galilee, the Galileans received him. And again, it's another inferences to all those miracles that he performed at the first Passover, having seen all the things that he did at Jerusalem at the feast, for they also went unto the feast. Because the Passover was one of the 3 major feasts where, pilgrimages occur. The implication, beloved, of 43 through 45 is that the northern part of the country are spiritual adrenaline junkies. They're thrill seekers. And we know that, and we will see that with the feeding of the 5,000. Hey, here's this free meal ticket. And that's the way this has been presented to us. Jesus wants more than that. The region of Galilee, folks, it's a real paradox. They probably were the most privileged people during majority of the public ministry. The things they saw, the things they heard. 24/7 access to Jesus. And it never penetrated their heart at all. And it's happened early in the public ministry. And it's almost like, again, comfort. I fear comfort. They were too comfortable. It was too close. It bred contempt. It's just not the carpenter's son. And they couldn't deny that something, really unique and really special was going on, but yet they refused to put the 2 and 2 together. Don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but just another passage in the Gospel of Mark. And when he went out thence and came into his own country, his disciples followed him. And, this is just sort of what the populace is saying. They were astonished. From whence hath this man these things? What wisdom is given unto him? Mighty works are wrought by his hand. Again, is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary? They were offended at him. Next slide. But Jesus said, a prophet is not without honor in his own country and among his own kin and in his own work. Look at verse 5. And he could there do no more mighty works, save that he laid his hands upon a few sick folk and healed them, and he marveled because of their unbelief. And that's a summary of Galilee. It started earlier, beloved. I think Mark is later on in the Galilean ministry. This could very well be at the very beginning of the Galilean ministry, but they just, whoosh, they just went right over their heads. And so 43 through 45 are set the stage. Brian, take me back to that. Thank you. Take us back. Jesus said unto him, except ye signs and wonders, you will not believe. And so that's a bigger context there, folks. I believe the second aspect of verse 48 is a gut check to this nobleman. And Jesus is saying this, do you really understand what you're doing by asking me to get involved? He's challenging the man. I want more than an adrenaline junkie. I want more than a thrill seeker. You want a cure. I want a commitment. Are we on the same page? Do you understand what I'm talking about? I think it's very similar to what happened in Luke chapter 18 when the rich young ruler approached Jesus and says, good teacher, good master, what must I do to be saved? And Jesus, in a very similar way, challenges that young man. He says, why do you call me good? There's none good except God. In other words, do you really believe that I'm God? He's trying to get the young guy to think. And do you really believe, because, the young guy is about to get challenged with a pretty heavy challenge, isn't he? Because he has an idol in his life. It's his money. Go sell what you have, give it to the poor, and come follow me. Do you really believe I'm God? That's what he's saying to this man. I want a commitment from you. I don't want thrill seekers. I don't want people who are going to treat me like a genie in a bottle. When they get into a problem, they rub the lamp, I pop out, grant the 3 wishes, and they put me back in. And beloved, that's what I fear. That's what our country's view of God has become. They maybe temporarily look up, the crisis passes, and then, okay, we don't need God anymore. And God will not be treated that way. And it's really neat. You put the conversation together. Lord, you've got to come heal my son. You've got to come heal my son. You've got to come heal my son. The Lord says, I want more than an adrenaline junkie. Brian, take me back to that verse 49, if you can, please. The nobleman said unto him, Sir, come down. Lord, I understand. I understand what you really want. I want you to come anyway. It's just really cool when you put it's summarized for us, but it's really cool when you put the whole thing together. And that answer pleased Jesus. And he says in verse 50, Jesus said unto him, Go thy way, your son lives. Now, let me ask you this question. Did Jesus do what the man asked? And the answer is yes and no. But he didn't do it exactly what the way the man wanted. The man says, Lord, you've got to come to my house. We've got to start to travel right now or first thing in the morning. Jesus said, you can go home. Your son's alive. This appears to be, and beloved, in a sense it is, it's the horns of a dilemma, isn't it? If the man continues to persist, you've got to come, you've got to come, you've got to come, there's no trust, is there? If he leaves without taking Jesus with him, there is no tangible proof yet that his son is alive. What do? But beloved, that, I believe, is what the sign that this miracle represents: faith. And it's logical. This is all about faith. Because how is conversion experienced? Faith. How is the Christian life lived after we're saved? Through trust. And that's what we learn from this passage. Just as we learned key things about conversion from water into wine, there are key aspects about faith in this passage. And one of them is this: seeing is not always believing. And in many instances in the Christian life, believing is seeing. And that's what's going to happen to this man. And we see a progression of faith. And the man believed the word that Jesus spoke and went his way. Good for him. Good for him. And that's what we'll begin to pursue next week. We will finish the narrative. As we know, at some point in the 20 miles, his servants come. They say, Master, your son's alive. He's not just progressing, he's alive. And the man says, what time did it happen? 7 o'clock last night. And the man did the math. And he believes, and his whole household believes. Just some